Well, friends, it is good to be with you all this evening. Thank you for taking some time to learn together and grow as in this important service to the church. Um, it's been good to meet you all, and I just want to spend the rest of our time together for the next 45 minutes or so to talk about what does the clerk do. And I was really happy to see your comments about what was helpful. And so I've tried to add in some of the things you were particularly interested in learning about into this presentation. But I'm always, anytime I do a presentation like this, I'm going to start with the Book of Order. And the first thing you'll see in the Book of Order is about the clerk is what does the clerk even do? And so I want to point out these 5 things that are the core responsibilities of the clerk. We're going to talk about the first 4, and I'll tell you about the 5th at the in a second. We're going to talk at length about the first 4. The clerk is, so this is at G-30104. And these are the things that all clerks do, not just clerks of session, but clerks of presbyteries and other places as well. So the clerk is, there are other things too that clerks end up doing, but these are the requirements. If you get it down to the bare bones, this is what we need from our clerks of session. First of all, to record the transactions of the session, to to make sure we know what we are doing and what we have done when we want to look back on it. The clerk is responsible for keeping the rolls of membership and attendance. And closely related to that are to maintain the required registers. There are rolls and there are registers. Those are very closely related, and we'll talk a little bit about what they are. Then the clerk is responsible for preserving the records of the session. Your session should be making arrangements for this too in their life together, but it is your job to lead that. And we'll probably spend as much time on that as we spend on anything, because that's ultimately where you all had the most questions and interest in the survey you filled out about what you were interested in learning. And the 5th thing that the Book of Order says that clerks do is that you are responsible for furnishing extracts of these records upon request. There are, and this is the thing I'm going to just go ahead and say a word about now. This is probably the thing you will do at one level the least, because you'll do this once a year when you bring your minutes to the presbytery for review and submit the statistical report. I think I'd call that an extract of records. But I hope the only other time you would have to do that is if there were a disciplinary matter, there were a remedial case that came out of your session. And so there was somebody who needed some information about that action. I would work with you very closely to do that. But this also is the way in which we say the 3rd piece of that is that the clerk is the one who writes the letter that says the session took this action on this date. You can, in any church court and really in any setting anywhere, you as the clerk are empowered not to sign on behalf of the church, but to affirm that the session took this action. So it is your role to furnish those extracts when needed. So we're going to talk about the first of these boxes, recording the transactions of the session. This is better known as the minutes. So this is one of my favorite cartoons that shows up sometimes, that we think about. The minutes could be such that you stand up and you read them following last month's flannel graph presentation on the need to update technology. The board voted in favor of whatever you voted for. I hope your minutes are not functioning that way. I hope you don't have any flannel graph, and I sure hope you're not having to stand up and read every single word along the way. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about what to include in your session minutes. These are just some quick statements about what to make sure is there and some things you might want to make sure are not there. So the most important thing in your minutes is to include a record of actions taken. So make sure that it is very clear from your minutes that that anybody can tell what the session did. You also want to give a brief summary of the context or rationale that's included in a written report. So if the worship committee brings a report and they say we want to move to having communion every Sunday, and they give a rationale for that, you want to include that in your minutes. You may even want to attach the full report. That's your decision. That's based on what your session likes to have. But just for the future, it's helpful to have that little summary of the context or rationale for something. Because that gets to the third thing you always want to include. You want to include the details that tell the story of the congregation. Because somebody is going to look at these minutes at some point in the future, and they're going to try to understand what's going on, what you were doing in that moment. So take an extra minute and include the details that tell the story so that somebody can come back and say, hey, this church was going through something and they made a decision to do this. Without necessarily having to read every single email that was involved in leading up to the recommendation and action, but to have those details so it's very clear. I actually had the opportunity today to look at some minutes of a congregation, and it was a really helpful thing that there was a request to dig into these minutes and to learn more about why they had closed. And unfortunately, we couldn't grant the request, but I was able to learn very quickly what were some of the driving forces behind this congregation's decision to ask the presbytery to move them to dissolution. So some things not to include in your minutes. Please resist the temptation to include the content of the discussion. Don't list out everybody who spoke and what they said. That is making more work for yourself, not just in that moment of writing the minutes, but also in having them approved. So then everybody's got to read through it and say, did I actually say what the minutes said I said? And did the clerk get it right? This is not a recording of the meeting. There is a time and a place for the recording of a meeting. Y'all have described that. It's a great help for creating your minutes. But the minutes are not a recording. They are a record of the actions taken. So similarly, don't include all the names of the people who spoke, but you should include the names of the people who made a motion. Now, I can blow your mind on a lot of things. I'm going to blow your mind on this one right now, probably. You do not need to note who made a second. Robert's Rules does not require that you name the person who made a second in the minutes. The thing I think most sessions and others waste the most time on is trying to figure out who seconded a motion. It's not helpful. Most of our sessions don't even need a second. According to Robert's Rules, any group of about a dozen or less is what's called a small board. In a small board, you don't need a second for any motion. But more often than not, that will blow people's minds to the point that it's not worth trying to change their opinion. So just take a second, move on. Don't try to track down who made it. But the other thing not to include in your minutes is anything that distracts from the story of the congregation that's told through the actions taken. Don't get into all the finer details of why you've done it. Make it easy for somebody who's looking back on the history of your church to understand what happened, when it happened, and just a titch of why it might have happened. Give them enough context that they can understand those questions. So those are some unsolicited suggestions about session minutes. Before we move on to required roles and registers, are there any questions about minutes that you might have?
Do you have any samples that you provide of
I don't have a
Good.
standing sample in my regular file, but I will make sure that they get added. So I should mention as well, there will be a resources folder I will send to everybody who registered for this meeting. If you're watching the recording later and you didn't register for it, just drop me an email and I'll make sure you get access to it. And I think in there are some sample minutes in there too. So, but I will make sure that we get, if we don't have those, that we get them added. It's a
Yeah,
great
I just want to
question.
make sure I'm not like over detailing, which I have a tendency to do. So thank you.
It's a great question, though. And so, one other nice thing that I encourage you to do, many of you have already been a part of it or are soon going to be a part of it. The one great way to learn what others are doing is to attend the annual review of session minutes because you get to read somebody else's minutes and you get to see how they do things. I have seen great interchange at those meetings where people read somebody else's minutes and said, "Oh, that's a great idea. I really like how you did this." And they go home with some great insight into how to do things in a helpful way. But I will make sure we get some in the resources folder as well. Any other questions about the minutes? So let's talk for a minute about the required roles and registers. There are these show up and are listed out at G-30204, A and B. So the required roles that every session and clerk is required to keep are the roles of baptized members, the roles of active members, and the roles of affiliate members. Baptized members are those who have been baptized but not yet confirmed or received into church membership. So that's more often than not, that is the list of people who are children of church members. The list of active members is the main list that we all deal with all the time. That is the number you report every year on your session annual statistical report, and it is the basis of per capita for the Presbyterian General Assembly. And then the third role is the role of affiliate members. Affiliate members are people who have temporarily relocated to a different place and have voice but not vote in the life of a different congregation. I think the easiest example of affiliate members is a snowbird. So somebody who lives in New York for the summer and in Florida for the winter. And they're going to be on the roll as a member in a church in one of those two places. And in the other place, they can be listed as an affiliate member. So that's rather than trying to change their membership every once a year, they're going to be listed out that way. The Book of Order also requires 4 registers be kept. The register of all baptisms. That's distinct from the role of baptized members. So sometimes you might baptize someone upon them joining the church. That person gets put on the baptism register, but not on the baptized member roll. So that's why there's that distinction, because you always want to be able to find a baptism. You have the register of ruling elders. So every time someone is ordained as a ruling elder, they get added to that list. Same goes for deacons. And when you have an installed pastor, that person gets added to that register with the dates of their service. One other thing that is an interesting provision related to registers is that the Book of Order is explicit in permitting a session to create other registers as it sees fit. So this is most commonly used. I've seen it in many churches. We no longer have an inactive members roll, but you might maintain a register of former members. So the people who you take off the roll because you haven't seen them for a couple years, or the adult children of members who've moved away but haven't found a new church home yet. So that is a good use of a register to cover those kind of folks. Are there any questions about the required roles and registers?
Yes. Would you repeat about the baptisms?
So yeah, so
Again?
so you have the distinction between the roll of baptized members and the register of baptisms is this. Every time someone is baptized, you put them on the register of baptisms. If someone is, so actually you're going to put them in on one of two rolls when they're baptized. So if it's a child who is not joining the church, then they are put on the register of baptisms and on the roll of baptized members. If it is a if it is someone who is being baptized at the time they join the church, confirmation usually, but sometimes as an adult who has never been baptized or a member of a church before, then they are listed on the register of baptisms and then placed on the roll of active members. So the register is just the list of the baptisms that you do. The roll is the active list, and it gets maintained over time. Is that helpful?
Uh, Clear as mud.
Keep asking good questions. When you get when it comes to it, drop me an email, give me a call. We'll have a conversation.
Okay.
We'll figure out what needs to happen.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Any other
Andy?
questions? Yes.
Yes. You mentioned that there's no more inactive members, but here's you also talking about the affiliate members, and you the example you give the affiliate members like a snowbird.
Mhm.
Actually, our church still keep a lot of members. They moved away, back to Taiwan, but they didn't mm, transfer the members to what they still go to the church in it locally. So we would put them under affiliated members or what?
If you
How?
have not removed them from the roll, they remain on the active members roll. If you remove them from the roll of members, then
Uh,
you can put them on a register, a list of people who are former members. But yeah, you would, anybody who is on the active member roll, you're going to be assessed per capita for.
yeah, because see, when you are in the active members, you can vote and you can be robed, right?
Right. That's
But those
correct.
And those members actually they may pop up when they visit once a year or twice a year, but how we count them, we so far we have not count them as active members because before we put them in under the inactive members, but you say now we don't have the inactive members, so
Yeah, so if you make someone an inactive member, they come off of the active member roll.
right.
So that,
But
yeah, so
mhm.
that's, so they are not counted as an active member.
So we can still put them in active. I just maybe I was misunderstood you
You
about
are
the
not, so the change happened about 12 years ago. You are no longer required to keep an inactive role.
not required, but we
You
can.
you may keep an inactive role,
Okay, okay, thank you.
but you are not required to.
Okay, okay,
Okay?
all right, thank you.
Any other roles and registers questions? So I'm going to move on to talk about records. And this is where, like, all the things you shared, that the organizational tools, all of those things, this is where we get into the fun of it, is talking about records. And so there are lots of different types of records. There are 6 that are major and important for you all that I'm going to mention tonight. The first one we've been talking about is the minutes of session meetings. And kind of a subset of that is always the minutes of a congregational meeting. All of those are permanent. Everything on this screen here is considered a permanent record. And you need to make sure you don't lose it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So minutes of session meetings, minutes of congregational meetings, annual reports. So your congregation, what's given to the congregation each year about the budget, that sort of thing. Your bylaws, your charters, your incorporation records, keep those. Your annual budget, your annual financial statement, and your audit, the report of your audit, all of that is permanent record. Your report of your financial review, if it's not an audit, that is a permanent record. And absolutely always keep legal and judicial records. So this is a partial, incomplete, obviously, list of permanent records. The Presbyterian Historical Society keeps a more complete list of their recommendations for record retention, and I will make sure that there is a link to that in the resources folder, because that is a very handy and helpful tool. It talks about, for example, financial records. So your day-to-day financial stuff, you keep that for 7 years, like you keep your tax returns, kind of thing. So there's a schedule for how that happens, and you can use that schedule to develop a process for maintaining your records. But these, I will say, if you keep nothing else, if you slip up and leave something out, don't ever lose the minutes of your session meetings. That's the most important thing. And to that end, paper is good. I'd even say paper is king. It is the most reliable and affordable permanent storage medium. You need to keep the paper in a limited access location at the church. This is not you're not trying to keep these secret from people. You are trying to make sure that they don't get lost or messed with. And once you're not using the records actively, I strongly encourage you to move your long-term records, I'd say maybe every 5 years, move 5 years worth of records to permanent storage at the Columbia Seminary Archives or the Presbyterian Historical Society. They are properly equipped to manage those records. They are watching the things to make sure that it doesn't get leaked on when the AC unit breaks down, or if there's some sort of emergency that affects them. Don't leave stuff in the basement file cabinet. That is absolutely important. You may lose them. So paper is good. And why is paper preferred over electronic records? So 30 years ago, this is what an electronic record looked like. Can you do anything with that today? I suspect most of us don't have any kind of device that will read that disk. The Presbyterian Historical Society keeps an old laptop around with a floppy disk drive just so they can try and read stuff. So that's just like getting the physical access to it. Once you actually find something that you can put that in, good luck, one, reading the stuff that's on there, and two, like the actual bits and bytes, and two, understanding what those bits and bytes are. Does anybody use a PWP file anymore? You see that list there? Can you do anything with that today? So this is a cautionary tale about dependence upon electronic records. I love my electronic records. They are wonderful and helpful. I can access them on my laptop wherever I go. But they can't be your only copy. So a few do's and don'ts about electronic records, because this is one of the things that you all asked a lot about in your survey about what you wanted to learn today. So Four do's and four don'ts. Number one, make a paper copy of your minutes once they're approved. You're doing that anyway for Presbytery review, but go ahead and do it right away. Also use cloud storage like Google Drive or OneDrive, but make sure you use it with access control so that everybody on session can read it. But if somebody gets access to that folder who's not supposed to have it or doesn't know what they're doing with it, that's probably the more common thing, they'll go in and delete everything. I once worked with somebody who the COM chair in my previous presbytery actually went in and deleted all of the COM files in the Dropbox because, oh, I need to free up some space in my Dropbox. So he just went in and wiped out 5 years worth of COM records because he was the chair and had edit access to things and didn't know what he was doing. Thankfully, there are ways, like we caught that before it got out of hand, and we were within 30 days, we could restore them, and we did. And we took away his edit access right away. Because if that's what he was going to do, he was not going to do it well. So use access control and let people write it who you trust. Also make your records into PDF-A files. Now, you probably heard of a PDF, but you may not be familiar with a PDF-A. It is becoming more familiar. It is a special format of a PDF that is marked as archival. That's what the A stands for. So archival professionals have worked with the computer community to identify the things that are needed to make a long-term file. These are not those PWP files that showed up in that list. These are things that we're going to be able to read in 100 years. If they're still around, we'll be able to read them because there's enough people that use this format that and have agreed to use this format that we're going to have to keep it available. Another thing to always do is don't set out on your own as clerk. Coordinate your systems with whatever else your church is doing. This kind of relates to the cloud storage with access control. Some of you mentioned you're on the church's Google Drive now. Use the church's Google Drive, not your Google Drive. We in the Presbytery can help you get some of that kind of stuff set up so that, again, you share it, you can get access control that gives people the levels of access that they need rather than giving everybody the privilege to edit everything so they can go in and almost always unintentionally, but occasionally intentionally change the permanent records of the church. Some don'ts. Don't be the only person who has access to your electronic records. If something happens to you, if you win the lottery and get to move to Paris, we don't want to have to call you. We want you to be able to enjoy that. So make sure that somebody else always has access to that thing. Also, don't keep only one copy of your electronic records if those are the only copy you have. Trust your backup system. Make sure you've got something in place. I will confess, I've been here 2 years. I just started backing up regularly. And that is on me. And I am thankful that nothing has happened. Several of you talked about how much you love Google Docs. It's great. But don't leave your final minutes just in a Google Doc in a shared folder. Somebody's going to go in, probably unintentionally, but on a bad day intentionally, and change something. And you can't always tell. So yes, there's an audit trail for it, but you don't want to have to audit that. Just take the time to save it to a PDF in a separate folder so you've got it ready to go. And the last thing, don't assume that your successor is going to fix your records problems. Don't pass your problems off to somebody else if at all possible. Sometimes this is what happens. Sometimes you got to step away as clerk unexpectedly. But let that be the exception. Do a good job of putting your records in a space that others can access them, and that meet these do's and don'ts as well as possible. So, and don't give them that, an old school floppy disk and be like, I think these are those session minutes from 1998, but we need to print them off. Go ahead and figure out how to do it. So all of that to say, I'm techie enough to get in trouble sometimes, but I'm also techie enough to try to help you with your electronic records things. So if there are ways I can support you as you try to move your documents along, please let me know. But I am gonna keep pushing you back to say paper is best. It is the one known reliable way of doing it. Acid-free paper is the absolute best. Most paper is acid-free at this point now, but take the time to do that right. You are thanking people for it when you have to find things now. They will be thanking you for it 50, 100 years down the line. So, all right, coming down from soapbox, do you have any questions about records, and especially paper and electronic records?
I have a question, Andy. When you mentioned electronic records, currently we have not been keeping records electronically. Is that a recommendation? Is there something that we should be doing?
You do not have to keep your records electronically. You may, if you choose to keep them electronically, make sure that's your backup method. That's you always have paper to fall back on, and try to follow these best practices. Any other questions on record keeping?
Andy,
Yes.
tell us about the most desirable notebook or binder to keep minutes in. Not that the artificial leather thing with the metal spindles, please. We know that's good.
Well, and that one is, so you probably have seen that big giant binder. You might have one. It's often the church register is the one that's every church seems to have, and they're wonderful books. Don't get me wrong, they're not required. So what I would encourage you to do is to take your annual records and every couple of years move them into something more permanent. A permanent document, a permanent file is not a plastic binder. That's actually a really bad way to do it, because the toner that most of us print with reacts with the plastic and then peels off when you open it. So if you've ever had that there, if you've ever seen that, you've probably experienced how the text ends up on the binder, and you can't read it anymore. So number one, even when you do put it in a plastic binder, like to bring it to the minutes review, put an extra couple sheets of paper at the front and the back just to make sure you don't lose anything. But then every few years, move them to a fabric binder, or if you want to make an investment into those big heavy binders, I encourage you to do that. You can. I do not recommend the ones from Cokesbury for a lot of reasons. Number one, they're the most expensive option out there. Number two, they are usually a non-standard paper size. So they're not a letter size page, but they're letter plus. And that's not helpful, because then you only have to buy that paper. So you can buy a standard letter sized permanent style minutes binder at a little bit of a discounted rate, from a company called Spectra and Associates. They're out of New York State. There's a link to them in the resources folder. There are probably some other places you can get that too, get that from too, but I definitely recommend them. They're good folks. It's a homegrown company in upstate New York, and they can help you out with whatever you need. They will, and they also, most importantly, so you might remember that the Cokesbury ones, they have kind of a rectangular post in them, so you need a special hole punch for them. You can buy you can buy minutes books from Spectra that have standard 3-hole punch
Mhm.
posts. So
Okay.
strongly recommend there. They will also sell you archival quality paper. So if you want to make that investment, you can buy it in a ream of 500 sheets, letter size, and it's much more affordable than buying it from Cokesbury.
Gotcha. Thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions on records? Another option I'll mention as well, you can also every so often, if you so choose, you can send your minutes off to a bindery and have them bound like a book. This is what the Presbytery does every year. We get an annual volume of our minutes. There is a service now that does that on acid-free paper. It's like, and you send them a PDF, and then they print it for you. So if you're interested in that it's you can look for services on. There are several places that will do this, and they usually advertise it as being for dissertations and master's theses, but they will take anything you give them and turn it into a printed book on high quality paper. It's not cheap, but it is relatively affordable. So if you want to do that option, that's something else you can do. That's what we're doing with the Presbytery now. We produce 2 copies each year. One goes to the Presbytery, one goes to the seminary, to the permanent archives. So, and that also produces our electronic edition as well. It means we have to have a PDF. So, and you just go on the website and upload the PDF, and now we've got the PDF as well for our internal purposes. So, any other records questions? So I'm going to now talk about 2 things that are not in that list of Book of Order requirements, because I think they're 2 of the things that a clerk can do to help make sure that our churches keep functioning well. And because part of your responsibility as the clerk is to make sure that we don't miss things. So the first way we do that is through what I call the clerk's report. This is a monthly list of the items that just need to get recorded in the minutes. Sometimes you call this an admit to record. Around here, that's a common term. But this is just the things that we need to make sure that somebody can know that we did. They might get reported elsewhere sometimes too, but the clerk's report is the way to make sure that you as the clerk make sure that the session records that this happened. And the interesting thing about the clerk's report is there's usually going to be things that happen. It's a lot of stuff is listed in there twice. First of all, you move toward approval of something, and then so the session approves it 1 month, and then the next month you record that it happened. So you're going to be moving stuff in there twice. So these are some things that often show up in the clerk's report. Baptisms. So you would it is a great way to make sure that you list out all the baptisms that need to happen, because you need to approve them before they happen, ideally. Sometimes we backdate. That's okay. Don't make it your regular practice, but sometimes it has to happen. And then you record that it happened. So we approve it, and then we mark that it happened. Same goes for the Lord's Supper. The approval of the Lord's Supper and the celebration of the Lord's Supper. A word about that. I strongly recommend that your session authorize the Lord's Supper once a year. Just because we always have it on the first Sunday of the month does not mean that you've authorized the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Take the time to come up with the schedule. As a pastor, I presented this in my pastor's report once a year, and I did it kind of on the liturgical year basis. We kind of went Advent through Christ the King, so I would present it in November, and it would list out all the times we expected to have communion. over the course of that liturgical year. And then so we approved it there, and then the clerk would report that we had it on the way. Another piece of approving the Lord's Supper is to authorize, just because somebody is homebound and asks for communion does not mean that your pastor has the authorization to do that. That's actually a session thing, strangely enough. So along with that annual piece, I strongly suggest you give permission for the pastor to administer the sacrament related to pastoral care. So the language that that we used in that report was the pastor had the authority to administer the sacrament when it was pastorally sensitive and theologically appropriate. We used that a couple times when a church member's family asked for communion at the funeral. So we had permission. We already had that blanket permission for the pastor to do that, and then it just got reported. You also want to include in your clerk's report items related to membership. You've received new members. You've added them to the roll in one way or another. You've transferred them out to another church, or they've been removed because of inactivity or some other reason. The clerk's report is also a great place to record weddings, births and deaths, and ordination and installation. I jokingly say the only thing of these 6 boxes that does not require session approval is birth and death. So, you know, everything else you're going to need a motion for. So you just need to be ready that you're getting approval for baptisms, Lord's Supper, membership, weddings, and ordination and installation. But you as the clerk just want to make sure that that we have that record of births and deaths that are related to the congregation. You think about how for generations, the way that the world recorded births up until probably 150 years ago, the only record we had of birth was the church's record of birth. And we want to continue that history and story as much as we can. You have any questions about the clerk's report?
I have a quick one. For weddings, is it just weddings officiated by the pastor? Like, what if someone rents your building?
So that will need to be approved by the session. So you need to record the wedding. So if the pastor does a wedding off-site, you should record it. That one actually does not require session approval. The pastor can make a decision about officiating at a wedding without the session's approval. But for a wedding to happen on church property requires session approval. Sometimes that's through a policy, but you still need to record that it happened or is going to happen. Anything else?
I keep some things at the bottom of all my blank dockets. I like this. For example, we also need to have, because we have deacons, I need to know that I have to have at least one joint meeting. So any of those things, I just keep a little list on there, when we're going to do the budget, when we'll have elections, and some of those things, so that I don't have to try to remember what are we doing in May, what do we do in August. But I just keep a little list below there on the blank docket, and that helps me to, you know, make sure we don't forget something.
So Nancy is actually giving us the great segue to the next slide, which is the annual checklist. So the annual checklist is that very list of the outline of tasks that are done at different periodic intervals. So you want to make sure that you know what has to be done every month, what you need to do every quarter, what needs to happen in every January. And this is going to be customized for your needs as a congregation. There are some examples of this in our resources folder that I'll share with you, but you're going to need to set this up for you. So if your congregation elects elders in April so that they can be installed in June, you're going to need to customize the checklist for your session, for your congregation. But this is exactly what Nancy's saying. making sure that you don't forget to include certain things at certain times. A great way to build this, if you don't have one already, is to take the session minute review form that you're asked to fill out and make sure that you've got everything on there that's going to get done each year. So some things don't happen in every session every year, but to build off of that review form so that you can make sure that stuff happens. Any questions on the annual checklist? This is related to the clerk's report. A lot of the stuff on your checklist is going to be in the clerk's report, but it's not all. But they're a little bit different too.
Andy, I have a question about indexing.
Okay.
How do you do that?
I hate indexing. I have to do it for the Presbytery's minutes. I strongly suggest that unless you have a particular need to index your minutes, that you don't need to index your minutes. Most of our sessions are not of any size that you need to be able to go and turn to a particular day in the year that has a meeting. If you knew it happened in a particular year, you could probably go through their records. You know, a year's records is maybe 50 pages at most. So you can flip through pretty quickly and find what you're looking for. If you do decide to index, I index on an annual basis, I would say, and come up with your topic list of the things that matter, and then just update it year after year.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
I guess. Well, as you're talking about the annual checklist, what I found to be helpful is to use the checklist that you send out at the beginning, well just when you're going to get it, to make a copy and keep that during the year. And as you're going along and things have happened, just fill that out as you're going along. That's been helpful to me.
That is a great way to do it. That is definitely how I would recommend doing it. I've got to do the Presbytery's checklist, and I actually was part of redesigning the Synods checklist for Presbytery minutes, and I'm a little bit still like, do I have to do that? But I do. It's part of my job. It's the thing we all kind of love to hate. So, any other questions about the annual checklist? So I'll show you one of my other favorite cartoons, just as we bring things to a close. I sure hope your session does not ever have to do anything like this, to pass a motion, to form a committee, to select a task force, to see why we can never get anything done in our board meetings. So, you know, that is not how we need to be functioning as the church, and I sure hope your session does not function that way. Do you have any final questions as we draw things to a close? Things we didn't get to talk about.
Andy, can you share those PowerPoint with us?
Yes, I will make sure you get a copy of the PowerPoint. That'll be in that resources folder, and I will get that to you. I'll get that out to everybody who registered for this in the next day or two, once we've had a chance to process the recording and get it in a place that we can all see it.
Thank you.
Andy, will it have that blanket sentence that you use to authorize the pastor to perform, to celebrate communion?
I will add that to the PowerPoint. I'll just make a note here, add blanket sentence. Because I know I have it off, I can recite it off the top of my head because we used it enough times. It was suggested to me, I didn't come up with it, but it is very effective and useful. So I'll make sure
would it be easier for you to say it slowly so we can write it down?
No, I'll put it in. I'll put it in the resource because you probably others may need to get it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll add a slide for that. Any other comments, questions, etc.?
Andy, one question. The
Mhm.
church is required to do an annual audit. That's true, right?
The church is required to do an annual financial review. And there is a distinction between a financial review and an audit being required. So the Book of Order uses the term financial review to describe what is required. It also says that that is not meant to imply any particular accounting review. There are three ways you can do this that are most common. The first is a traditional CPA level audit. So to have a CPA come in and do a full audit of your books. That is a traditional way to do it. It is also by far the most expensive. And do not recommend that unless you're a large church. You need to get into at least over $1 million budget, probably larger than that to justify that cost. The second option still works with a professional to engage in what an audit professional would refer to as a financial review. And that is not a true audit, but it reviews the processes and procedures that are involved in creating financial statements and processing financial matters. So you definitely can consider that as an option, as an alternative to a full paid audit. The third option is one that the Book of Order provides, and it is that a financial review can be completed by a committee of members versed in financial procedures. So this needs to be distinct from the people who do that work regularly. So if you have a finance committee and a treasurer, that finance committee probably doesn't need to be doing the financial review as well. Or at the minimum, the person who's the treasurer is not the point person on the financial review, and is not involved in it. You've got another committee that is independent and also unrelated to the treasurer. So there is a level of independence required here. This is actually in many ways can be it is the least expensive option, and it can often provide the most information and the most helpful and actionable information, because you've got people who know the church, who are looking for things along the way. And so you can create a process that works for them. There are different resources out there about how to create this. There's one on the website from St. Andrew's Church in Tucker. If you go to the Clerk's Corner on the Presbytery website, those resources are there. And we are also aware of some other resources that may be out there for folks who might need to be trained in that. So you might try to get a group of people who are trained by someone in doing this, and that committee might then be prepared to do it for 5 or more years. So if they're doing it right. So those are the options for an audit. Those are required annually. And you will get an exception on your minutes if you do not have them. Any other questions? Well, it has been a joy to be with you this evening. Thank you for taking your time out on a Tuesday evening to learn about some of these sorts of wonderful things and spend some time together. Many blessings upon your work. Please don't hesitate to be in conversation with me if I can ever be of support in your ministry as clerk. And I'm very serious when I say it as a ministry. This is such an important part of who we are as Presbyterians. We are people who make decisions, and we want to make sure that we have a record of those decisions. And it is a very important part of our work to keep track of that. So thank you for your role in doing that. Keep up the good work. Let us know how we can support you. I'll see you at a minute's review, or if not before. And happy to walk alongside you. Thank you for your service, and I'll see you soon.